The ground beneath my feet started trembling at exactly 3:47 p.m. on what should have been just another Tuesday afternoon. I was standing next to our silver Honda Accord at Pete's Corner gas station in Riverside, California, when the earth decided to remind everyone who was really in charge. But it wasn't the 6.8 magnitude earthquake that shattered my world that day. It was watching my husband Derek Hayes drive away, leaving me stranded in a disaster zone because his precious BMW might get scratched helping in the aftermath. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What Derek didn't know was that his abandoned wife wasn't just some helpless suburban housewife. What he was about to discover would make his carefully constructed world of lies crumble faster than the freeway overpass that collapsed 20 miles east of U.S. The morning had started like any other in our Ocean View Estates home. Derek was hunched over his laptop at the kitchen island, supposedly working on quarterly reports for his insurance company, while I prepared his usual breakfast of steel-cut oats with fresh berries. The routine felt as familiar as breathing after 8 years of marriage, though lately I'd noticed Derek seemed more interested in his phone than his food. "Anna, we need to drive out to Riverside today," Derek announced without looking up from his screen. "My mother's storage unit payment is overdue, and she's freaking out about losing all her antiques." Carol Hayes had always been dramatic about her possessions, treating her collection of vintage furniture and china like priceless artifacts rather than the yard sale finds they actually were. Still, Derek's devotion to his mother's requests had always seemed admirable, even when it meant spending our weekends driving across Southern California for various errands. "That's fine," I replied, refilling his coffee cup. "I was planning to visit Frank at the gas station anyway," he mentioned, wanting to show me the new security system he installed. Frank Torres had become an unexpected friend over the past year. The 73-year-old owner of Pete's Corner gas station possessed a sharp wit and military bearing that reminded me of my grandfather. What Derek didn't understand was that Frank and I shared a connection that went deeper than casual conversation about weather and local news. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message, and I noticed how quickly he angled the screen away from me. This had been happening more frequently over the past few months, along with unexplained late nights at the office and weekend conferences that never seemed to have any documentation. The drive to Riverside took nearly 2 hours through increasingly sparse desert landscape. Derek spent most of the journey on hands-free calls with work colleagues, discussing policy renewals and claim adjustments in the monotone voice he used for business. I gazed out the passenger window at the rocky hills and scattered Joshua trees, thinking about how different this landscape was from the lush forests of North Carolina where I'd grown up. Pete's Corner gas station sat at the intersection of two rural highways, serving as a lifeline for travelers crossing the desert between Los Angeles and the mountain communities to the east. Frank had purchased the property 15 years earlier after retiring from a career that he described vaguely as government work. The station's weathered exterior and vintage gas pumps gave it an almost nostalgic charm, though Frank had quietly upgraded most of the infrastructure with surprisingly sophisticated equipment. Derek pulled up to pump number 3 and immediately began complaining about the heat. "This place is like an oven," he muttered, stepping out of the air-conditioned car. "How does anyone live out here?" Frank emerged from the office wearing his usual uniform of khaki work shirt and jeans, moving with the precise gait of someone who had spent decades in structured environments. His weathered face broke into a genuine smile when he saw me, though his expression remained neutral when greeting Derek. "Anna, good to see you," Frank said warmly. "That new system I mentioned is working perfectly. Want to take a look?" Derek rolled his eyes as he inserted his credit card into the pump. "More exciting gas station technology," he said sarcastically. "I'll be in the air conditioning." I followed Frank into the station's small office, where he had indeed installed what appeared to be a remarkably advanced security setup. Multiple high-definition monitors displayed views from cameras positioned around the property, and a sophisticated communication console sat beside his desk. Impressive system for a rural gas station, I observed, noting details that would have been invisible to most civilian visitors. Frank's knowing look confirmed what I'd suspected about his background. "Sometimes old habits die hard," he said quietly. "Plus, it pays to be prepared out here. Desert can be unforgiving when things go wrong." We chatted for several minutes about the system's capabilities and the increasing number of travelers who stopped at his station during summer months. Frank mentioned that several state agencies had consulted with him about emergency preparedness for the region, given the station's strategic location and communication capabilities. "Your husband seems in a hurry today," Frank observed, glancing toward the pump where Derek was pacing impatiently while fuel flowed into his tank. He's eager to help his mother with some storage unit situation, I explained, though Derek's behavior seemed more agitated than usual. That's when Derek's phone rang, and everything started to unravel. Through the office window, I watched Derek answer the call with an expression that shifted rapidly from casual to panicked. His free hand ran through his dark hair repeatedly as he moved away from the car, seeking privacy for his conversation. Even from a distance, his body language screamed guilt and desperation. "Melissa, calm down," I heard him say as he paced near the edge of the parking lot. "We discussed this. The timing isn't right yet." Melissa. I didn't recognize the name, and Derek had never mentioned working with anyone called Melissa. My stomach began to churn as I watched my husband's animated gestures and increasingly frantic tone. Frank had noticed my attention shift to Derek's conversation. "Everything all right?" he asked gently. Before I could answer, the ground beneath our feet gave a subtle tremor. Frank's expression immediately became alert, and he glanced at the seismic monitoring equipment mounted near his communication console. "Was that?" I started to ask. "Earthquake," Frank confirmed, watching his instruments. "Small one, but often they come in clusters out here." Derek was still engrossed in his phone conversation, apparently oblivious to the Earth's warning. His voice carried across the parking lot with increasing urgency. "No, you can't call her directly," he was saying. "Anna doesn't know anything about the accounts. We have to stick to the plan." The accounts. My blood pressure spiked as fragments of Derek's conversation reached me. What accounts was he discussing with this mysterious Melissa? And why was he specifically mentioning that I didn't know about them? Frank had moved to his communication equipment and was monitoring what appeared to be seismic data feeds. "Anna," he said quietly, "I think you should hear this." On his radio, emergency frequencies were crackling with activity. Reports of minor tremors throughout the region, with seismologists expressing concern about the potential for a larger event. Frank adjusted the settings and tuned into California emergency management channels. Elevated seismic activity across the San Andreas fault system. Residents should review emergency preparedness plans. Another tremor shook the building, stronger this time. Derek finally ended his phone call and stalked back toward the gas pump, his face flushed with anger and anxiety. When he saw me through the office window, his expression shifted to forced casual concern. "We should probably head back," he called out. "Mom's expecting us soon." But I had heard enough of his conversation to know that Carol Hayes and her storage unit were not the real reason for this trip. Derek was meeting someone named Melissa, and they were discussing financial accounts that apparently involved me in some way. "Actually," I called back, "I'd like to stay and visit with Frank for a while longer. Why don't you go ahead to your mother's, and I'll catch a ride back later?" Derek's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. Frustration, calculation, and barely concealed panic flashed across his features before settling into what he probably thought was husbandly concern. "Anna, that's ridiculous," he said, approaching the office door. "We drove out here together. I'm not leaving you stranded at a gas station in the middle of nowhere." Frank stepped outside, and I noticed how his posture subtly shifted into something more alert and protective. "I'd be happy to give Anna a ride back to the city later," he offered. "Or she could call someone to pick her up." "Absolutely not," Derek snapped, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. "Anna, get in the car. Now." The command in his tone triggered something deep in my training that Derek knew nothing about. Years of conditioning made me automatically assess the situation for threats and escape routes, even as the civilian part of my brain struggled to process that my husband was essentially ordering me around like a subordinate. That's when the third tremor hit, and this one was impossible to ignore. The ground rolled beneath our feet with emotion that made my inner ear scream warnings. Frank immediately grabbed the doorframe for support while Derek stumbled backward against his car. The earthquake lasted perhaps 15 seconds, but it was strong enough to set car alarms wailing across the parking lot. "That was significant," Frank said grimly, rushing back to his monitoring equipment. "At least a 5.0, maybe stronger." Emergency radio chatter exploded with reports from across the region. The earthquake had registered 6.2 magnitude within epicenter 40 miles northeast of our location. Road closures were already being reported, and emergency services were mobilizing for potential damage assessment. Derek's phone rang again, and this time he answered without moving away from us. "Melissa, I felt it too," he said urgently. "Look, I can't deal with this right now. I'll call you once I'm back in the city." But Melissa, whoever she was, apparently had other ideas. "No, Derek, you listen to me," came a woman's voice loud enough for both Frank and me to hear clearly. "The bank called about the transfer. They're asking questions about Anna's signature on the authorization forms. If they investigate, we're both finished. My world stopped spinning. Transfer? Authorization forms? What had Derek done with my signature? Derek finally noticed that Frank and I could hear every word of his conversation. His face went white as he realized the extent of his exposure. I have to go, he said quickly into the phone, but Melissa wasn't finished. Don't you dare hang up on me, Derek Hayes. You promised me that money was clean. You said Anna would never find out about the withdrawals from her military pension account. My military pension account. The account that was supposed to be our safety net for retirement. The account that Derek had helped me set up when I transitioned out of active duty 5 years ago. The account that contained my disability payments, service bonuses, and carefully invested contributions from 8 years of deployment pay. Frank was watching my face with growing concern as the implications hit me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Derek had not only been cheating on me with someone named Melissa, but they had apparently been stealing from my military benefits. Anna, Derek started, finally ending his call, I can explain everything. Can you? I asked quietly, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the rage building in my chest. Can you explain why you and Melissa have been accessing my pension account? Can you explain why she's worried about my signature on authorization forms I never signed? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His carefully constructed lies were crumbling as fast as his ability to form coherent sentences. That's when the big one hit. The earthquake that changed everything struck with no warning beyond a split second of eerie silence. The ground didn't just shake, it bucked and rolled like a living thing trying to throw us off its back. The magnitude 6.8 quake lasted nearly a minute, and in that time, the landscape around Pete's Corner gas station was permanently altered. Frank's building swayed alarmingly but held together, a testament to his careful maintenance and structural upgrades. Derek's BMW, however, was not so fortunate. A section of the overhead canopy collapsed directly onto the car's roof, crushing the metal and spiderwebbing the windows. Derek stared at his destroyed vehicle with horror that seemed disproportionate to the property damage. My laptop, he whispered. All my files were in the car. Frank was already moving with military precision, checking his communication equipment and monitoring emergency frequencies. Major damage reported throughout the region, he announced. Multiple road closures, bridge inspections underway. Looks like we're going to be here for a while. Derek pulled out his phone and frantically began dialing. I need to call Melissa, he said, seemingly oblivious to how his priorities appeared to Frank and me. She needs to know about the delays. Not his wife, who had just discovered his betrayal. Not his mother, who he claimed to be helping. His first concern was updating his mistress about logistical problems that might interfere with their financial crimes. Frank caught my eye and nodded toward his office. Anna, why don't you help me coordinate with emergency services? I have a feeling we're going to be the communication hub for this area until the roads reopen. As we walked back into the building, I heard Derek behind us, already deep in conversation with Melissa about damage control and timeline adjustments. The earthquake had trapped him at the scene of his confession, but his primary concern was still protecting his schemes. What Derek didn't realize was that being stranded at Frank's gas station was the best thing that could have happened to me. Because Frank Torres wasn't just a retired government worker with an impressive security system. And Anna Carter wasn't just an abandoned military wife with a pension account worth stealing. Some secrets, once revealed, change everything. And as Derek would soon discover, the most dangerous secrets are the ones hidden by the people closest to you. The earthquake had cracked open more than just the desert floor. It had shattered the foundation of my marriage and exposed the fault lines that had been building pressure for months. Now it was time to see what happened when everything finally gave way. The aftershocks continued throughout the evening, each tremor a reminder that the ground beneath our feet could no longer be trusted. Derek had spent the past 4 hours pacing around the gas station like a caged animal, alternating between frantic phone calls to Melissa and increasingly desperate attempts to convince me that I had misunderstood their conversation. Frank's communication equipment had transformed his modest office into an emergency coordination center. Radio chatter filled the air with updates from California Highway Patrol, emergency services, and National Guard units mobilizing across the region. The main highway back to Los Angeles remained closed indefinitely due to a collapsed overpass, effectively stranding us until morning at the earliest. The whole infrastructure is compromised, Frank explained as he monitored multiple frequency channels. They're running damage assessments, but it's going to take time. Could be 12 hours, could be 24 before the roads reopen. Derek's face had grown increasingly pale as the reality of our situation sank in. This is a disaster, he muttered, staring at his crushed BMW. Melissa is expecting me back tonight. There are documents that need to be signed. What documents? I wanted to ask, but something in Frank's expression warned me to remain patient. He was listening to Derek's rambling with the focused attention of someone gathering intelligence. Anna, Derek said suddenly, as if remembering I existed, maybe you should call your sister to let her know we're okay. Use my phone since yours is dead. My phone wasn't dead. I had deliberately turned it off after hearing Derek's conversation with Melissa, wanting to think clearly without interruptions. But Derek's offer to let me use his phone struck me as suspicious, especially given how protective he had been of the device lately. That's thoughtful, I replied carefully, but I'm sure Kate is fine. She doesn't worry about earthquakes unless they're over 7.0. Frank looked up from his radio with interest. Your sister lives in earthquake country? North Carolina. I said. She's a seismologist at Duke University. Studies plate tectonics and fault systems. Derek's expression shifted to something resembling panic. You never mentioned that Kate studies earthquakes. You never asked about her work, I replied, which was true. Derek had always shown minimal interest in my family, treating my relatives like obligatory additions to his social calendar rather than people worth knowing. Frank's knowing smile suggested he understood the significance of having a seismologist sister, especially one with academic connections to research institutions. Derek, meanwhile, seemed to be calculating how this new information might affect whatever plans he had been making with Melissa. Frank, I said, settling into a chair beside his communication desk, would it be possible to contact Duke University through your system? I'd like to check on Kate, and she might have additional information about seismic activity in this region. Absolutely, Frank replied, already adjusting his equipment. University emergency networks often have the most current geological data. Derek stepped closer, clearly trying to overhear our conversation. Is that really necessary? We're not going anywhere tonight anyway. But Frank was already making contact with Duke's Emergency Communications Center. Within minutes, he had connected me with Kate's laboratory, where she was working late analyzing preliminary data from our earthquake. Anna? Kate's familiar voice crackled through the radio speakers. Are you somewhere safe? The seismic readings from your area are concerning. I'm at a gas station in Riverside with a friend who has excellent communication equipment, I assured her. We're fine, but I wanted to get your professional opinion on what we experienced. Kate's analysis was sobering. The earthquake we had felt was part of a larger seismic event that had activated multiple fault lines across Southern California. Several smaller aftershocks were expected throughout the night, and the possibility of additional major quakes remained elevated for the next 48 hours. Anna, Kate continued, given the infrastructure damage and ongoing seismic activity, you should consider staying put until the emergency services complete their assessments. Travel could be dangerous for the next day or two. Derek's phone buzzed with another text message, and I watched his face contort with frustration as he read it. Melissa is getting impatient, he announced, as if this was somehow my problem to solve. Frank had been monitoring emergency frequencies while Kate and I spoke, and now he turned to face Derek directly. Your friend Melissa wouldn't happen to be trying to drive out here, would she? Because the roads are closed to civilian traffic. Only emergency vehicles are getting through. No, Derek said quickly. She's staying in the city. Just worried about us, you know. But his phone rang again almost immediately, and this time Derek stepped outside to take the call. Through the office windows, I could see him gesturing frantically as he spoke. Interesting woman, this Melissa, Frank observed quietly. Very persistent. Kate's voice came back through the radio. Anna, while I have you on secure communications, there's something else you should know. I've been tracking some unusual financial activity lately that might interest you. My stomach dropped. What kind of financial activity? Someone has been making inquiries about military pension databases and disability payment systems. The queries came through academic networks, supposedly for research purposes, but they were specifically targeting individual account information rather than aggregate data. Frank and I exchanged glances. The timing of Kate's discovery, combined with Melissa's earlier comments about my pension account, couldn't be coincidental. Kate, I said carefully, would these inquiries have been sophisticated enough to access specific account details? Potentially, yes. Especially if someone had legitimate authorization documents or convincing forgeries. Anna, you should check your military accounts immediately. Derek returned from his phone call looking even more agitated. Melissa says there's been some confusion at the bank, he announced. Something about verification procedures for the account transfers. Frank was already setting up a secure internet connection through his communication system. Anna, why don't you log into your accounts and verify that everything is in order? Just to put Derek's friend's mind at ease. Derek's face went white. That's not necessary. The bank confusion is probably just standard post-earthquake protocols. Financial institutions get paranoid about security during emergencies. But I was already accessing my military pension account through Frank's secure connection. What I found made my hands shake with rage. Over the past 6 months, someone had systematically withdrawn nearly $40,000 from my account. Through electronic transfers. Each withdrawal had been accompanied by authorization forms bearing what appeared to be my signature, but I had never signed any such documents. The transfers had been made to an account belonging to something called Hayeswright Financial Consultants. Derek's last name combined with what must be Melissa's surname. Frank was reading over my shoulder, and his expression had shifted into something coldly professional. Anna, I think you need to see this. He pointed to the transaction details, which showed that the most recent transfer had been scheduled for tomorrow morning. The amount was substantial, $12,000, representing nearly my entire quarterly disability payment. Derek, I called out, my voice deadly calm. Could you come here please? Derek approached reluctantly, clearly sensing that his world was about to collapse entirely. I'm looking at my pension account, I said conversationally. There seem to be some transfers I don't remember authorizing. To something called Hayeswright Financial Consultants. Would you happen to know anything about that? Derek's mouth opened and closed silently for several seconds before he managed to speak. Anna, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Really? I asked. Because it looks like you and Melissa Wright have been forging my signature to steal my military benefits. Frank had moved to his radio equipment and was quietly making contact with what sounded like federal law enforcement agencies. I caught fragments of his conversation about financial crimes involving military personnel and interstate fraud. You don't understand, Derek said desperately. The money was just borrowed. Melissa has investment opportunities that would have doubled our returns. We were going to pay everything back with interest. Our returns? I asked. Derek, this is my pension account. Money I earned through 8 years of military service, including 3 combat deployments. Money that was supposed to support me if my service-related injuries ever prevented me from working. Derek's phone rang again, and this time he answered it without stepping away. Melissa, she knows, he said immediately. The earthquake trapped us here, and she accessed her accounts. Everything is exposed. Melissa's response was loud enough for Frank and me to hear clearly. You idiot. You were supposed to keep her away from any computers until the final transfer cleared. Now we're going to prison because you couldn't handle one simple assignment. Derek tried to lower his voice, but Frank's office acoustics carried every word. What do you want me to do? The roads are closed, I can't get back to the city, and she's sitting right here staring at all the transaction records. Tell her it was an investment mistake, Melissa suggested. Say you were trying to help her retirement planning and made some bad decisions. Play up the caring husband angle. Derek looked at me hopefully. Anna, honey, I was trying to surprise you. Melissa has connections in financial planning, and we thought we could grow your pension account through some strategic investments. Frank finished his radio conversation and turned back to us. Anna, I've been in contact with the Military Criminal Investigative Service. They're very interested in hearing about this situation. Apparently, there's been a pattern of similar crimes targeting veterans' benefits across several states. Derek's face went from pale to gray. Military investigators? This is just a misunderstanding between husband and wife. There's no need to involve federal agencies. Actually, Frank said quietly, fraud involving military benefits is a federal crime regardless of the relationship between the perpetrators and victims. The government takes theft from veterans very seriously. Melissa's voice came through. Derek's phone again, higher and more frantic now. Derek, you need to get out of there immediately. If military investigators are involved, we're looking at federal prison sentences. Leave Anna wherever she is and drive to Mexico. Derek stared at his phone as if it had suddenly sprouted fangs. Drive to Mexico? Melissa, my car is crushed under a gas station canopy, the roads are closed due to earthquake damage, and I'm stranded in the desert with federal investigators potentially en route. Then figure something out. Melissa screamed. Because if you get arrested, I'm telling them this was entirely your idea. I have documentation showing that you approached me with this scheme. Frank and I watched this conversation with fascination. Derek's criminal partner was abandoning him faster than rats leaving a sinking ship, and Derek was apparently too panicked to recognize the betrayal. Melissa, you can't just disappear, Derek pleaded. We're in this together. The business account is in both our names. Not anymore, Melissa replied coldly. I transferred everything to offshore accounts this afternoon. Good luck explaining to investigators why you stole from your wife to fund a business that no longer exists. The phone call ended with Derek staring at his device in shock. His criminal partner had just confessed to stealing not only from me, but from him as well. Frank's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Frank, this is Captain Reynolds at Camp Pendleton. We understand you have a situation involving fraud against military personnel. What's your current status? Camp Pendleton. The major Marine Corps base located about 90 miles southwest of our position. Frank responded with our location and a brief summary of the situation, including the fact that we were stranded due to earthquake damage. Copy that, Frank, Captain Reynolds replied. We have assets in the area conducting earthquake damage assessment. We can have investigators and transportation to you within 2 hours. Derek looked like he might vomit. Transportation? Anna, you don't need to involve the military in a private matter between us. Derek, I said quietly, this stopped being a private matter when you forged my signature to steal money that I earned serving my country. This stopped being a marriage when you abandoned me during a natural disaster to protect your criminal activities. Frank had pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer and was organizing what appeared to be legal documents. Anna, there are some things I should tell you about myself. And some resources that might be available to you that Derek doesn't know about. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and his face somehow managed to become even paler. Melissa emptied our joint checking account, he whispered. Everything we had saved for the business is gone. What business? I asked. Derek looked at me with the expression of a man watching his life disintegrate in real time. Hayeswright Financial Consultants was supposed to be our retirement plan. We were going to use the initial capital from your pension to establish a client base, then pay everything back once we were profitable. You mean you were going to steal my military benefits to start a business that you planned to own with your mistress, then maybe pay me back if it worked out? Derek's silence confirmed that this was exactly what he had planned. Frank spread several documents across his desk. Anna, as I mentioned, I had a career in government work before retiring to run this gas station. Specifically, I spent 25 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency, specializing in financial crimes and fraud prevention. Derek's eyes widened as he processed this information. When I retired, Frank continued, I maintained certain contacts and clearances that allow me to assist with investigations involving military personnel. I've been monitoring suspicious activity in this region for several months, including the financial inquiries your sister mentioned. Frank handed me a comprehensive report documenting a fraud ring that had been targeting veterans across Southern California. Derek's and Melissa's activities fit the pattern perfectly, and my case would provide crucial evidence for prosecuting the entire network. Derek, Frank said with professional courtesy, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise that right until proper legal representation is available. Derek stared at Frank with dawning horror. You're arresting me? I'm detaining you pending the arrival of federal investigators, Frank corrected. Given the evidence of ongoing financial crimes and the flight risk you represent, I have both the authority and the obligation to ensure you remain available for questioning. Derek's phone rang one final time. This time, it wasn't Melissa calling. Mr. Hayes, said an unfamiliar male voice, this is Agent Martinez with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating the Hayeswright operation for several weeks. Your partner Ms. Wright was arrested this evening attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with approximately $200,000 in cash derived from fraudulent transfers. Derek sank into a chair as the full scope of his situation became clear. Melissa hadn't just abandoned their partnership, she had been planning to disappear with all their stolen money while leaving him to face the consequences alone. Agent Martinez, Frank said, taking Derek's phone, this is Frank Torres. I'm maintaining security for the suspect and the victim pending your arrival. As Frank coordinated with federal agents, I found myself staring at Derek with a mixture of anger, disappointment, and something approaching pity. This man I had lived with for 8 years, had trusted with my financial security and emotional well-being, had planned to steal my military benefits to fund a business venture with his mistress. But as devastating as his betrayal was, I was beginning to realize that Derek had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that Anna Carter, suburban housewife, would be an easy victim. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. The radio crackled with another transmission from Camp Pendleton. Frank, this is Captain Reynolds again. We're accelerating our response timeline. Helicopter transport will be at your location within 90 minutes. Derek looked up sharply. Helicopter? Frank smiled grimly. Anna, I think it's time you Told Derek about your actual military background. Since he's going to find out anyway when the investigators arrive. Derek turned to me with confusion and growing dread. What military background? You were a communications specialist. You processed paperwork and maintained radio equipment. I met his eyes directly, feeling a calm certainty settle over me as I prepared to reveal the truth that would change everything Derek thought he knew about his wife. Derek, I said quietly, I was never a communications specialist. The silence that followed my statement stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Derek stared at me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that no longer fit together. Frank, meanwhile, had moved to a locked cabinet and was retrieving what appeared to be official documentation. What do you mean you were never a communications specialist? Derek asked slowly, as if speaking the words carefully might make them less threatening. Frank spread several classified folders across his desk, each bearing military seals and security clearances that Derek wouldn't recognize but would certainly find intimidating. Anna, Frank said formally, given the current circumstances and the federal investigation, I believe we have authorization to brief civilian suspects on relevant background information. I took a deep breath, feeling years of carefully maintained cover identity dissolving like morning fog. Derek, for the past 5 years of our marriage, you believed I was Anna Carter, former Army communications specialist who processed routine paperwork at Fort Bragg. That was my cover identity. Derek's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and growing alarm. Cover identity? Anna, what are you talking about? Frank handed me a folder marked with classifications that made Derek's eyes widen. Anna Carter is indeed my legal name now, I continued, but during my military service, I was Staff Sergeant Anna Martinez, United States Army Special Operations Command. Specifically, I was a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment's Intelligence and Reconnaissance Unit. Derek's mouth fell open. Rangers? But you said you never left the base. You said you worked in an office. I said I couldn't discuss my work in detail due to security protocols, I corrected. You assumed that meant I pushed papers around a desk. In reality, I spent 3 years conducting classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, specializing in financial intelligence and counterterrorism operations. Frank was monitoring radio traffic while we spoke, coordinating with multiple agencies that were converging on our location. Anna's unit was responsible for tracking terrorist financing networks and disrupting enemy financial operations, he explained to Derek. She has extensive training in forensic accounting, digital surveillance, and financial crime investigation. Derek looked like he was going to be sick. You're saying my wife is some kind of secret agent? Former secret agent, I clarified. I left active duty 5 years ago after being injured during a mission in Syria. The injury wasn't severe enough to prevent normal civilian life, but it ended my deployment eligibility. Hence the disability payments you've been stealing. Derek's phone, which Frank had placed on the desk after the FBI call, buzzed with a text message. Frank glanced at it and showed me the screen. Melissa, Derek, police just raided my apartment. They have everything. Financial records, forged documents, computer files. You need to disappear now. Derek read the message with growing horror. They raided her apartment? How did they find her so quickly? Frank's radio crackled with an update from federal agents. Mr. Torres, this is Agent Martinez. We've completed the arrest of Melissa Wright. She was carrying detailed records of the fraud operation, including specific information about targeting military veterans. This appears to be much larger than initially suspected. Derek slumped in his chair as the implications hit him. Larger? What does that mean? Agent Martinez's voice continued through the radio. Ms. Wright has been operating similar schemes in Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. We're looking at potentially hundreds of victims and millions of dollars in fraudulent transfers. Mr. Hayes appears to be a relatively small player in a much bigger operation. I felt a cold anger settle in my stomach. Derek, you didn't just steal from me. You helped Melissa steal from hundreds of veterans across multiple states. Derek shook his head frantically. I didn't know about other victims. Melissa said. This was just a one-time thing, a way to get startup capital for our business. I thought we were only borrowing from your account. Frank pulled up additional files on his computer system. Anna, based on the financial patterns Agent Martinez described, I think you should see this. He turned the screen toward me, displaying a comprehensive analysis of Melissa's operation. The scope was staggering. Over 18 months, Hayes Wright Financial Consultants had stolen approximately $2.3 million from veteran pension accounts across 4 states. The victims included disabled combat veterans, retired service members, and surviving family members receiving death benefits. Derek, I said quietly, reading through the victim list, do you see these names? Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez lost her leg to an IED in Afghanistan. Master Sergeant James Thompson, Purple Heart recipient with traumatic brain injury. Specialist Sarah Kim, widow of a soldier killed in action. Derek's face grew paler with each name I read. Anna, I swear I didn't know about other people. Melissa handled all the technical aspects. She said she had found a way to temporarily access your account for investment purposes. Investment purposes, I repeated flatly. Derek, you helped steal disability payments from a widow whose husband died serving our country. Frank's communication equipment suddenly burst to life with multiple incoming transmissions. All units, be advised we have helicopters approaching the gas station location. Military transport inbound with federal investigation team. Through the office windows, I could see lights approaching from the southwest. The distinctive sound of military rotors grew louder as 2 helicopters approached Pete's Corner gas station. Derek looked around frantically. Military helicopters? Anna, this is getting completely out of hand. Can't we just agree to pay back the money and handle this privately? Frank was coordinating landing procedures with the helicopter crews while monitoring multiple radio frequencies. Derek, you're looking at federal charges for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The military involvement indicates potential charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for crimes against service members. This stopped being a private matter the moment you targeted veterans' benefits. The first helicopter touched down in the parking lot, and I could see armed federal agents disembarking along with military personnel in combat uniforms. The second helicopter circled overhead, providing overwatch and additional communication support. Derek watched the armed agents approach with mounting panic. Anna, please. We've been married for 8 years. Doesn't that count for something? Can't you tell them this was just a mistake? I looked at my husband, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The handsome features and charming smile that had once attracted me now seemed like a mask covering someone I had never really known. Derek, I said quietly, 8 years ago you married Anna Carter, suburban communications specialist. But Anna Carter was a carefully constructed cover identity designed to help me transition into civilian life. You never actually met the real me. Frank opened the office door as federal agents approached. Anna, I think it's time Derek learned exactly who he tried to steal from. Agent Martinez entered first, a serious woman in her 40s wearing FBI tactical gear. She was followed by 2 military officers whose uniforms bore insignia that made Derek's eyes widen with recognition. Mrs. Carter, Agent Martinez said formally, I'm Special Agent Maria Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. This is Colonel Davidson from Army Criminal Investigation Command and Captain Reynolds from Marine Corps Intelligence. Captain Reynolds stepped forward with a slight smile. Actually, Agent Martinez, I believe proper protocol requires we address her by her military rank and operational designation. Derek looked confused. Operational designation? Colonel. Davidson consulted a classified folder before speaking directly to me. Staff Sergeant Martinez, on behalf of Army Special Operations Command, I'm authorized to inform civilian parties that your cover identity is being terminated due to the criminal investigation requiring disclosure of your actual service record. Agent Martinez turned to Derek with professional courtesy. Mr. Hayes, you should understand that your wife served with distinction in some of the most classified and dangerous operations conducted by United States Special Forces. Her expertise in financial intelligence made her particularly valuable in tracking terrorist funding networks. Derek stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Terrorist funding networks? Captain Reynolds opened another classified file. Staff Sergeant Martinez was instrumental in disrupting millions of dollars in terrorist financing operations. Her work directly contributed to the capture of several high-value targets and the prevention of multiple planned attacks against American interests. Colonel Davidson added, she received numerous commendations for valor and excellence in extremely hazardous conditions. The injury that ended her active duty occurred during a classified operation that I cannot discuss, but I can say that her actions during that mission saved the lives of her entire unit. Derek was staring at me with complete bewilderment. Anna, is this really true? Every word, I confirmed. The communications specialist story was necessary for operational security. Many special operations personnel maintain cover identities after leaving active duty to protect themselves and their families from potential retaliation. Agent Martinez had been reviewing files while the military officers briefed Derek. Mrs. Carter, based on your background and the scope of this investigation, we'd like to request your assistance in analyzing the financial evidence we've recovered from Ms. Wright's operation. Frank looked up from his communication equipment. Agent Martinez, I should mention that Anna has been working informally with my security monitoring over the past several months. We've been tracking suspicious activity in financial networks targeting veterans. Derek's head snapped toward me. You've been investigating financial crimes? While we were married? I've been monitoring potential threats to veteran communities. I corrected. It's something many of us do after leaving active duty. We look out for each other. Captain Reynolds was coordinating with his helicopter crew through a tactical radio. Staff Sergeant Martinez, we have authorization to transport you to Camp Pendleton for a full briefing on the investigation. Your expertise in financial intelligence would be invaluable in tracking the full extent of this fraud network. Derek stood up suddenly, looking panicked. Wait, you're taking Anna away? What about me? Agent Martinez answered matter-of-factly. Mr. Hayes, you'll be transported separately to federal detention facilities pending arraignment on fraud charges. Given the multi-state nature of the crimes and the amounts involved, you're looking at potentially decades in federal prison. Derek's face went white. Decades? But I was just trying to help with retirement planning. Colonel Davidson consulted his files again. Mr. Hayes, according to our analysis, you personally benefited from approximately $60,000. Stolen from your wife's military pension account. Additionally, you participated in fraudulent activities that targeted over 300 veterans across 4 states. Agent Martinez continued, the conspiracy charges alone carry a potential sentence of 20 years. Add identity theft, wire fraud, and targeting protected classes of victims, and you're looking at life-altering consequences. Derek turned to me desperately. Anna, please. You can't let them do this to me. We're married. There has to be some kind of spousal protection. Frank had been quietly coordinating with multiple agencies while we talked. Now he looked up with information that made Derek's situation even worse. Derek, Frank said grimly, Agent Martinez just received confirmation that Melissa Wright has agreed to cooperate fully with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's providing detailed information about every aspect of the fraud operation, including your level of involvement. Derek slumped back into his chair. She's testifying against me? According to the preliminary debriefing, Agent Martinez confirmed, Ms. Wright claims that you were the primary recruiter for the operation. She alleges that you specifically targeted your wife because of her military background and the substantial pension benefits available. Derek's mouth fell open. That's not true. She approached me. Melissa said she had connections that could help us invest Anna's pension money for better returns. Captain Reynolds exchanged glances with Colonel Davidson. Mr. Hayes, do you have any documentation supporting your version of events? Derek reached for his phone, then remembered that his laptop with all his files had been destroyed when the gas station canopy collapsed on his car. Everything was in my computer. All the emails and communications with Melissa. Frank had been monitoring recovery operations around the damaged vehicle. Derek, I'm afraid the laptop was completely destroyed in the collapse. Water damage from broken pipes, plus structural debris. Nothing is recoverable. Agent Martinez made notes in her file. So you have no evidence to contradict Ms. Wright's testimony that you initiated the fraud scheme? Derek looked around the room desperately, seeking some lifeline that didn't exist. His criminal partner had not only stolen money from him but was now blaming him for the entire operation. His alibi evidence was destroyed in the earthquake. And his wife, whom he had planned to victimize, had turned out to be a trained federal investigator with extensive law enforcement connections. Anna, Derek said quietly, what happens to us now? I met his eyes directly, feeling the weight of 8 years of marriage dissolving into clarity about what needed to happen next. Derek, I said calmly, there is no us anymore. You chose Melissa when you decided to steal from me to fund your business with her. You chose criminality when you forged my signature to access my military benefits. You chose to abandon me during a natural disaster to protect your illegal activities. Agent Martinez was preparing paperwork for Derek's arrest. Mrs. Carter, we'll need your testimony and cooperation in building the prosecution case. Given your expertise and military background, your analysis could be crucial in securing convictions for the entire fraud network. Captain Reynolds added, Staff Sergeant Martinez, this investigation has national security implications. Some of the targeted veterans had access to classified information, making this potentially more than just financial fraud. Derek listened to this exchange with growing horror as he realized the full scope of what he had become involved in. What he had thought was a simple get-rich-quick scheme was actually a sophisticated operation with potential links to national security threats. Frank's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. All units, be advised we have additional suspects attempting to flee the Los Angeles area. This operation is expanding rapidly. Agent Martinez looked up from her paperwork. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to advise you one final time that you have the right to remain silent and the right to legal representation. Given the charges you're facing and the cooperation Ms. Wright is providing, you might want to consider what information you can offer investigators. Derek stared at me one last time, perhaps hoping to see some trace of the woman he thought he had married. But Anna Carter, the suburban housewife who processed military paperwork, had never really existed. What he was looking at now was Staff Sergeant Anna Martinez, veteran of classified special operations missions, expert in financial intelligence and fraud investigation, and someone who had spent years tracking enemies far more dangerous than a small-time insurance salesman with delusions of easy money. The earthquake that had trapped us together at Frank's gas station had done more than crack the desert floor. It had shattered Derek's carefully laid plans and exposed him to consequences he had never imagined possible. As federal agents prepared to escort Derek to detention and military personnel ready to transport me to Camp Pendleton for the investigation briefing, I realized that the ground beneath my feet was finally stable again. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood. The helicopter ride to Camp Pendleton gave me 45 minutes to process the seismic shift my life had just undergone. Below us, the California landscape stretched endlessly, dotted with emergency vehicles responding to earthquake damage. But the destruction visible from the air paled in comparison to the wreckage of my marriage and the criminal network that Derek had entangled himself in. Captain Reynolds sat across from me in the military transport, reviewing classified files through noise-canceling headphones. Occasionally he would glance up and nod, as if confirming details about my service record that only a few people were authorized to know. At Camp Pendleton, I was escorted to a secure briefing facility where the full scope of the investigation was laid out in stark detail. Agent Martinez had been joined by additional FBI personnel, representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and military intelligence officers whose presence indicated this case had implications far beyond simple financial fraud. Staff Sergeant Martinez, began Colonel Davidson, we need your assessment of the financial intelligence patterns we've uncovered. Your experience in tracking terrorist funding networks makes you uniquely qualified to analyze what we're seeing. The briefing room's walls were covered with network analysis charts, financial flow diagrams, and suspect photographs that painted a disturbing picture. Melissa Wright's operation wasn't just stealing from individual veterans, it was part of a systematic effort to compromise military personnel with access to sensitive information. The targeting is too sophisticated for random fraud, I observed, studying the victim selection patterns. Someone with inside knowledge identified veterans with specific security clearances and financial vulnerabilities. Agent Martinez highlighted several cases on the display screen. That's our assessment as well. Look at these victims: Marine Corps intelligence analysts, Army communications specialists, Navy cryptographers. All people with ongoing access to classified systems despite being retired or disabled. The implications were staggering. Derek had unknowingly become part of what appeared to be a foreign intelligence operation designed to compromise American military personnel through financial coercion. Colonel, I said, connecting the patterns I was seeing, this isn't just about stealing pension money. Someone is building leverage over people with security clearances. Captain Reynolds pulled up additional files on his secure tablet. Staff Sergeant, we've identified at least 47 victims who maintained active security clearances after leaving military service. Many work for defense contractors or government agencies in sensitive positions. Agent Martinez added context that made the situation even more serious. We believe the ultimate goal was to create financial dependency, then gradually pressure these individuals to provide classified information or facility access in exchange for resolving their manufactured financial crises. My training kicked in as I analyzed the operational methodology. It's a classic intelligence recruitment technique. Create a problem, offer a solution, then slowly escalate the requests until the target is completely compromised. Frank's voice crackled through the secure communication system from his gas station. Military Command, this is Torres. I have an update on the suspect Derek Hayes. He's been attempting to contact additional parties since the FBI agents took him into custody. Colonel Davidson activated the communication link. Frank, what kind of contacts? Unknown phone numbers with international area codes. The calls aren't going through because I've isolated his communication access, but the attempt patterns suggest he was part of a larger network than we initially suspected. This was getting worse by the minute. Derek wasn't just a small-time criminal who had fallen for Melissa's scheme, he was potentially connected to foreign intelligence operatives. Agent Martinez was coordinating with federal prosecutors while military intelligence assessed the national security implications. Staff Sergeant Martinez, we need you to review Derek's personal communications and financial records. Your knowledge of his behavior patterns combined with your intelligence training could help us identify other compromised individuals. Over the next several hours, I found myself conducting the kind of analysis I had done countless times in combat zones, except now I was investigating my own husband's criminal activities. Derek's phone records revealed a complex web of communications with people whose identities raised serious red flags. Colonel, look at this pattern, I said, highlighting suspicious transactions on the financial analysis display. Derek received payments from shell companies registered in countries that are known for hosting foreign intelligence operations. Captain Reynolds confirmed my analysis through classified databases. Those companies have been flagged by the Treasury Department as potential money laundering operations linked to hostile foreign governments. Agent Martinez was taking notes for the prosecution case. Mrs. Carter, this transforms Derek's charges from financial fraud to potential treason and conspiracy with foreign agents. We're looking at life imprisonment rather than the decades we initially discussed. The secure phone rang with a priority call from FBI headquarters. Agent Martinez answered with the encryption protocols, then put the call on speaker. Agent Martinez, this is Deputy Director Morrison. We've arrested 6 additional suspects based on the intelligence Staff Sergeant Martinez provided. This operation spans 12 states and involves an estimated $50 million in fraudulent transfers. $50 million. The scope of what Derek had become involved in was staggering. Deputy Director, I interjected, based on the operational patterns I'm seeing, I believe there are additional cells that haven't been identified yet. The methodology is too sophisticated and coordinated for the suspects we've arrested to be the entire network. Deputy Director Morrison confirmed my assessment. Staff Sergeant, we're hoping you'll consider temporary reactivation to assist with the full investigation. Your expertise in financial intelligence and personal knowledge of the suspects makes you invaluable to this case. Temporary reactivation. The possibility of returning to active duty, even briefly, felt like stepping back into a world where I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of achieving. Sir, I replied formally, I'm prepared to serve as needed to protect national security and pursue justice for the veterans who were targeted by this operation. Colonel Davidson handed me reactivation paperwork that had apparently been prepared in anticipation of my agreement. Staff Sergeant Martinez, you'll be attached to the Joint Terrorism Task Force with temporary rank restoration and full security clearance reinstatement. Agent Martinez coordinated the logistics. We'll need you to confront Derek directly. Your personal relationship and knowledge of his psychology could be crucial in getting him to reveal information about his handlers and the broader network. The idea of facing Derek again as an active military investigator rather than his victimized wife felt like stepping into armor I had forgotten I possessed. Frank's voice came through the communication system again. Military Command, Derek Hayes is asking to speak with Anna. He claims he has information about the operation that he'll only share with her. Colonel Davidson looked at me questioningly. Staff Sergeant, are you prepared for tactical interrogation of the suspect? I felt the familiar calm focus that had carried me through dangerous missions in hostile territory. Yes, sir. Let's find out what Derek really knows. The confrontation was arranged in a secure interview room at Camp Pendleton. Derek was brought in wearing federal detention clothing, flanked by FBI agents and military security personnel. When he saw me in military uniform with my rank insignia restored, his face went through a series of expressions that ranged from shock to fear to desperate hope. Anna, he said quietly, you look different. I am different, I replied formally. I'm Staff Sergeant Martinez, United States Army Special Operations Command, currently attached to the Joint Terrorism Task Force investigating your criminal activities. Derek glanced nervously at the recording equipment and the federal agents observing our conversation. Anna, I need you to understand that I never meant for things to go this far. When Melissa first approached me, she said it was just a simple investment opportunity. Agent Martinez consulted her files. Mr. Hayes, according to our investigation, you received payments totaling over $15,000 from foreign shell companies. That suggests a level of involvement beyond simple investment mistakes. Derek's face paled. Foreign companies? Anna, I swear I didn't know about any foreign connections. Melissa handled all the technical details. I leaned forward, using interrogation techniques I had learned during my military service. Derek, we have evidence that you communicated with individuals in countries that actively conduct intelligence operations against the United States. Your phone records show patterns consistent with espionage activity. Derek's hands shook as he processed this information. Espionage? Anna, I'm an insurance salesman from Ocean View Estates. I sell car and home policies to suburban families. I don't know anything about espionage. Captain Reynolds activated a display screen showing Derek's communication patterns. Mr. Hayes, these phone numbers you contacted belong to individuals on federal watch lists for suspected foreign intelligence activities. Derek stared at the screen in horror. Those numbers came from Melissa. She said they were potential investors for our financial consulting business. Agent Martinez made notes while I continued the interrogation. Derek, what specific instructions did these investors give you about targeting military veterans? Derek's voice became almost inaudible. They said veterans were ideal clients because they had steady pension income and were often trusting of people who showed interest in helping them maximize their benefits. The tactical psychology was becoming clear. Derek had been recruited as an unwitting asset, manipulated through his relationship with Melissa to target specific categories of military personnel. Derek, I continued, did anyone ever ask you about my military background or security clearance? Derek hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Melissa asked a lot of questions about your service. She wanted to know what kind of work you had done, what clearances you might have had, whether you still had contacts in the military. Agent Martinez and I exchanged glances. This confirmed that I had been a primary target, not just a convenient victim. Mr. Hayes, Agent Martinez interjected, you're facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment. However, your cooperation in identifying other targets and providing information about the network could significantly reduce your sentence. Derek looked at me desperately. Anna, what should I do? I never intended to hurt anyone, especially not you. I maintained my professional demeanor despite the personal pain of seeing my marriage revealed as an elaborate targeting operation. Derek, you need to tell these agents everything you know about Melissa's contacts, the investment scheme, and any other people involved in the operation. Derek spent the next 3 hours providing detailed information about his recruitment by Melissa, the financial transfers he had facilitated, and the various individuals who had been presented to him as investors or business partners. Each revelation painted a picture of a sophisticated intelligence operation that had used his legitimate insurance business as cover for targeting military personnel. Agent Martinez coordinated with federal prosecutors while Derek's debriefing continued. Staff Sergeant Martinez, based on the information Mr. Hayes is providing, we're going to need to conduct additional arrests and investigate potential security breaches at several military installations. The scope of the investigation was expanding rapidly. What had started as Derek abandoning me at a gas station during an earthquake had revealed a foreign intelligence operation that threatened national security. Colonel Davidson updated me on the broader implications. Staff Sergeant, the Department of Defense is treating this as a potential breach of classified systems. Your reactivation may extend beyond this investigation if we discover ongoing security compromises. Derek finished his formal statement and was returned to federal custody pending trial. As the agents escorted him from the interview room, he looked back at me one final time. Anna, he said quietly, I'm sorry for everything. I watched my husband of 8 years being led away in handcuffs, knowing that the man I had married had never really existed. Derek Hayes, charming insurance salesman and loving husband, had been as much of a fabrication as Anna Carter, suburban military wife. Agent Martinez approached me as the interview room cleared. Staff Sergeant Martinez, we have one more development you need to know about. While you were conducting the interrogation, we arrested Melissa Wright's handler. She handed me a classified file with photographs that made my blood run cold. The man identified as Melissa's handler was someone I recognized from my classified operations in Syria. A foreign intelligence operative who had been responsible for attacks against American military personnel. This wasn't just about stealing pension money anymore. Derek had unknowingly helped the same people who had tried to kill me and my unit during our deployment. The earthquake that had trapped us at Frank's gas station had done more than expose Derek's betrayal. It had uncovered an active foreign intelligence operation targeting the very people who had served alongside me in combat. Now it was time to finish what they had started. 3 weeks after the earthquake that changed everything, I stood on the observation deck of a federal courthouse in Los Angeles, watching Derek being led away in shackles after his sentencing hearing. The judge had handed down 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and providing material support to foreign intelligence operations. It was a sentence that reflected not just his crimes against me, but his unwitting participation in an espionage network that had threatened hundreds of American veterans and active military personnel. The investigation that began at Frank's gas station had mushroomed into one of the largest counterintelligence operations in recent history. My temporary reactivation had become a permanent assignment to a joint task force dedicated to protecting military personnel from financial exploitation and intelligence targeting. The skills I had developed during my special operations service were now being used to safeguard the very community I belonged to. Agent Martinez joined me on the observation deck, carrying files that contained updates on the broader investigation. Staff Sergeant Martinez, we've made significant progress dismantling the network. 18 arrests across 8 states, with more pending as we follow the financial trails. The scope of the operation had been staggering. Foreign intelligence services had systematically targeted American veterans through sophisticated financial schemes designed to create leverage for future espionage recruitment. Derek's case had been just one small piece of a much larger puzzle, but his cooperation had provided crucial intelligence that allowed federal agencies to roll up the entire network. "What's the latest on Melissa Wright?" I asked, though I suspected. I already knew the answer. Agent Martinez consulted her files. Sentenced to 15 years, but she'll likely serve less with her cooperation agreement. She's provided detailed information about the recruitment methodology and target selection criteria. Melissa's testimony had revealed the clinical precision with which the operation had targeted vulnerable veterans. The selection process had identified individuals with ongoing security clearances, financial pressures, and psychological profiles that suggested susceptibility to manipulation. Derek had been recruited specifically because of his marriage to me, making him a pathway to someone with extensive special operations background and current access to classified networks. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek's attempt to steal from my military pension had instead led to my return to active service in a role that was both more meaningful and more personally satisfying than anything I had done in civilian life. Captain Reynolds approached with additional updates from Camp Pendleton. "Staff Sergeant, we've completed the security review of all potentially compromised personnel. Your analysis helped us identify 12 individuals who had been targeted, but hadn't yet been fully compromised. Those 12 people represented careers saved, families protected, and national security preserved." It was a tangible reminder that Derek's betrayal, devastating as it had been personally, had ultimately served a greater purpose. Frank Torres emerged from the courthouse elevator, having just finished testifying in the final cases related to the investigation. His gas station had been transformed overnight from a remote desert outpost into a crucial intelligence asset, and his cooperation had been instrumental in the successful prosecution of the entire network. "Anna," Frank said with genuine warmth, "I wanted to let you know that the Department of Defense has officially designated my station as a Homeland Security monitoring post. Looks like my retirement career just got a lot more interesting." Frank's unique combination of intelligence background and strategic location had made him invaluable to ongoing counterintelligence efforts. The earthquake that had stranded us together had revealed not just Derek's crimes, but also the foundation for a new partnership in protecting military personnel from foreign threats. Agent Martinez received a phone call that brought news I had been anticipating. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," that was Deputy Director Morrison. "The President is prepared to sign the Veterans Financial Security Act based on the recommendations from our investigation. The legislation would create new protections for military pension accounts, enhanced monitoring for targeting patterns, and severe penalties for anyone who attempted to exploit veterans' financial benefits." It was a systemic response to the vulnerabilities that Derek and Melissa's network had exploited so effectively. "There's one more development," Agent Martinez continued. "The Pentagon has approved your promotion to Master Sergeant and offered you a permanent position heading the new Veterans Financial Protection Task Force." Master Sergeant. The rank I would have achieved through normal career progression if my deployment injury hadn't ended my original military trajectory. Now it was being offered as recognition for work that had grown directly out of the worst betrayal of my life. I looked out over the Los Angeles skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been Anna Carter, suburban housewife living a carefully constructed civilian identity while my husband systematically stole my military benefits to fund his affair and unwittingly assist foreign intelligence operations. Today, I was Master Sergeant Anna Martinez, leading federal efforts to protect the veteran community from the kind of exploitation I had experienced personally. The transformation felt like emerging from a chrysalis I hadn't even realized I was trapped inside. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I felt the familiar wariness that comes from months of investigation and security concerns. But when I opened the message, it contained something I hadn't expected. "Anna, this is your sister Kate. I've been following the news about the investigation. I'm proud of who you've become. Call me when you're ready to talk about everything you couldn't discuss before." Kate, the seismologist who had provided crucial early support during that chaotic night at Frank's gas station. She had known there were aspects of my military service that I couldn't discuss, but she had never pressed for details. Now that my cover identity was no longer necessary, we could finally have the honest relationship that Derek's presence in my life had prevented. Frank was coordinating with his new federal contacts while Agent Martinez prepared for the next phase of the investigation. The work was far from over. Intelligence networks were persistent, and protecting military personnel from financial exploitation would require ongoing vigilance and innovation. Captain Reynolds handed me orders that formalized my new assignment. Master Sergeant Martinez, your first briefing as Task Force Commander is scheduled for next week at the Pentagon. You'll be working directly with senior military leadership and federal agencies to develop comprehensive protection protocols. The Pentagon. A year ago, I could never have imagined returning to that level of military service. My injury had seemed like the end of my career, forcing me into a civilian life that had never quite felt authentic. Derek's betrayal had shattered that artificial existence, but in doing so, it had revealed the path back to who I was meant to be. As we prepared to leave the courthouse, Agent Martinez received one final call that brought our investigation full circle. Master Sergeant Martinez, she said after ending the conversation, that was the Federal Detention Center. Derek Hayes has requested a meeting with you. He says he has additional information about the network that he didn't reveal during his original cooperation. Derek. Even from federal prison, he was still trying to manipulate situations to his advantage. But I was no longer the woman he had abandoned at a gas station during an earthquake. I was a federal investigator with the training and authority to handle whatever games he might be attempting. Schedule the meeting, I replied. If Derek has information that could protect other veterans from what we experienced, I need to hear it. The drive to the Federal Detention Center gave me time to reflect on how completely my life had changed. The suburban home I had shared with Derek was now part of the criminal investigation, its contents seized as evidence. The joint bank accounts had been frozen and would eventually be liquidated to provide restitution to fraud victims. Even the car we had driven to Frank's gas station remained crushed under debris, a physical symbol of how thoroughly Derek's world had collapsed. But rather than feeling lost or displaced, I felt more grounded than I had in years. The temporary housing provided during my reactivation was austere but familiar, reminiscent of military quarters I had occupied during deployments. My new uniform carried rank and insignia that reflected real accomplishments rather than the carefully maintained fiction of Anna Carter's civilian life. The Federal Detention Center was a stark concrete facility designed to hold high-security prisoners awaiting trial or serving sentences for serious federal crimes. Derek was housed in a unit reserved for inmates who had cooperated with federal investigations, providing them with protection from other prisoners who might view them as traitors or informants. When Derek entered the visiting room, I barely recognized him. The confident, charming man I had married had been replaced by someone who looked decades older, hollow-eyed and nervous. Federal prison had stripped away the facade he had maintained throughout our marriage, revealing someone I had never really known. Anna, Derek said quietly, settling into the chair across from me. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would agree to see me. I'm here as Master Sergeant Martinez, investigating ongoing threats to national security, I replied formally. Agent Martinez indicated you have additional information about the intelligence network. Derek winced at my tone but nodded. There are things I didn't tell the investigators during my original debriefing. Information I was too scared to reveal because I thought it might make my situation worse. I activated the recording equipment provided by federal marshals. Derek, this conversation is being recorded and will be shared with appropriate federal agencies. Do you understand and consent to that? Derek confirmed his understanding, then began revealing details that made my blood run cold. During his relationship with Melissa, he had been gradually introduced to other individuals who claimed to be investors or business consultants. These people had asked increasingly specific questions about military families in our community, particularly those with ongoing security clearances or connections to defense contractors. They wanted detailed information about social networks, Derek explained. Who was married to whom, what kind of work people did, which couples might be having financial or relationship problems. The methodology was sophisticated and chilling. The intelligence network hadn't just been targeting individual veterans, they had been mapping entire military communities to identify vulnerabilities and recruitment opportunities. Derek, I said, maintaining professional composure despite my anger, did you provide them with information about other military families in our neighborhood? Derek's silence confirmed what I already suspected. He had essentially conducted surveillance on our entire community, gathering intelligence that could be used to target other veterans and their families. I need names, I continued. Everyone you spoke with, everyone you provided information about, every detail you can remember. Over the next 2 hours, Derek provided a comprehensive briefing that would require extensive follow-up investigation. The network had been more extensive and more persistent than federal agencies had initially understood. Derek's cooperation would be crucial in protecting other potential victims. As our meeting concluded, Derek made one final attempt at personal connection. "Anna, I know I destroyed our marriage and betrayed your trust. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I looked at this man who had shared my life for 8 years, feeling something that might have been pity if it hadn't been overwhelmed by contempt for what he had chosen to become. "Derek," I said quietly, "you never loved me. You loved Anna Carter, a fictional character I created to blend into civilian life. You never even tried to know who I really was." Derek's face showed confusion and hurt, but also the dawning recognition that he had indeed fallen in love with an illusion. "Master Sergeant Anna Martinez is someone you never met," I continued. "She's someone who devoted her life to protecting this country and the people who serve it. She's someone who would never have tolerated the kind of betrayal you inflicted." I stood to leave, feeling the weight of my uniform and the authority it represented. "Derek, your cooperation may help protect other veterans from experiencing what you put me through. That's the only valuable thing you can contribute at this point." Derek remained seated as federal marshals prepared to escort him back to his cell. "Anna," he called out as I reached the door, "what happens now?" I turned back one final time. "You serve your sentence and live with the consequences of your choices. I continue protecting the people you helped target." The drive back to camp Pendleton took me through desert landscapes that reminded me of the night everything had changed. Frank's gas station was visible in the distance, now equipped with additional communication arrays and security equipment that reflected its new role in Homeland Security operations. Agent Martinez was waiting with updates from the expanded investigation. Derek's additional information had provided leads that were already generating arrests and uncovering previously unknown cells of the intelligence network. "Master Sergeant Martinez," she reported, "we've identified at least 30 additional potential targets based on the information Derek provided. We'll need to conduct security reviews and potential relocations for families that may have been compromised. 30 families who might have experienced what I had endured, if not for the earthquake that had exposed Derek's activities before the intelligence network could fully exploit their targeting efforts." Frank emerged from his gas station office, now wearing a badge that identified him as a federal security contractor. "Anna, I wanted to let you know that we've been monitoring communications in this area for the past week. The intelligence networks are actively trying to identify other potential access points. The work would never really be finished. Foreign intelligence services would continue developing new methods for targeting American military personnel, and our task force would need to evolve constantly to stay ahead of emerging threats." But as I looked out over the desert where Derek had abandoned me during an earthquake, I felt a profound sense of purpose and belonging that I hadn't experienced since leaving active duty years earlier. The woman Derek had left stranded at a gas station no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had reclaimed her identity, her mission, and her commitment to protecting the people who had served alongside her. The earthquake that had seemed like a natural disaster had actually been a liberation. It had cracked open the false foundation of my civilian life and revealed the bedrock of who I was meant to be. Master Sergeant Anna Martinez, protector of veterans, hunter of those who would exploit American service members, and living proof that some betrayals ultimately lead to triumph rather than defeat. Derek's face when my special operations team had extracted me from his abandonment had indeed been priceless. But not nearly as valuable as the expression on his face when he realized that the woman he had tried to victimize was actually the one person capable of bringing down the entire network he had unknowingly served. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for hundreds of veterans who would be protected by the systems we had built from the wreckage of Derek's betrayal. Sometimes the ground has to crack completely before you can build something stronger on the foundation that remains. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.